Thinking it's cheating is just overthinking it. If you're being cheated on, maybe there's something wrong with you? Like, not being charming enough? When I shared my worries, Layla just laughed it off as if it was nothing. She then left me behind and headed towards the checkout. I stood alone, biting my lip, unable to say anything. Carrying Ava, who was taking shallow breaths with a pale face, I hurried home. I was surprised when I arrived. A car was parked in front of our house, which should have been empty at this time. It was a company car belonging to Jackson's company. Cautiously, I quietly opened the front door, and there were Jackson and Layla's shoes. And from the bedroom, loud voices could be heard. I quickly left the house and headed to my parents' house. "Dad, Layla's in big trouble. She'll regret making an enemy out of me and Dad, that's for sure." I'm Abigail Davis, a housewife in her early 50s. I enjoy reading books, laughing, and making others laugh. Despite how I look, I think being cheerful is my strong suit. Despite my quiet and plain appearance, people have told me I'm like a comedian when I talk. My family is quite the opposite of me. Unlike me, who inherited my father's small eyes and nose, Layla is a beauty from our mother, glamorous and beautiful. I've been ridiculed for my looks by Layla since we were kids. Like, I'll never forget the incident over 30 years ago. Just after graduating high school, I was trying hard to apply makeup, and Layla suddenly said, You're doing makeup? It doesn't suit you. You should just stay barefaced and blend in with the old ladies." She was unapologetically condescending. My memories are filled with such instances of Layla being mean and selfish. As we grew into our 20s, Layla became an elementary school teacher. I had a job at a local company, but even that was a source of ridicule for her. After all, there's no guarantee in the private sector. I'm a public servant, so I'm guaranteed not to fail, which is great. Layla was boastful, but our mother, also a teacher, would frown and sigh. My jovial father would turn even such situations into jokes, making us laugh, but I only felt completely relieved when Layla wasn't around. I fell in love for the first time 3 years after starting my job at the age of 23. The guy was a quiet man from my workplace, wearing glasses, named Jackson. Eagerly heading out on dates, I was always met with a barrage of snide comments from Layla every time we met. Everything from my clothes, makeup, to my choice in men was criticized. But I brushed it off as usual, thrilled to deepen my love with Jackson. "I'm gonna marry Jackson. I've even introduced him to Mom and Dad. You should meet him too, Layla." I announced our marriage over the phone to Jackson. Then, Layla, who was single at the time, responded with a clearly irritated tone. "What? You're getting married before me? Unbelievable. Normally, you'd wait for your older sister, that's just low." I had no choice but to think, well, that's not my problem. I went ahead and got married without hesitation. Jackson and I got along well, and I believe we were truly happy. Soon after, Layla also got married. It seemed like an arranged meeting, and I couldn't help but worry she did it just to compete with me. Her husband, also a teacher like her, seemed like a very serious guy. Layla had kids before I did, and I remember feeling relieved that I didn't have to endure any snide remarks this time. Things were peaceful then. I never imagined that this peace would soon be shattered. After giving birth, I quit my job. Busy with childcare, I could no longer keep up with my appearance, and both my hair and face began to deteriorate. Suddenly, Jackson started to neglect me. "You've suddenly started looking old," he'd say, sighing as we passed by each other. I wanted another child, but Jackson was opposed and wouldn't agree. I was truly shocked and even considered divorce. When I discussed it with friends and parents, they all listened sympathetically. Desperate, I even consulted Layla when we met at our parents' house during a holiday. Her response was less helpful than clutching at straws. "You're lucky to have gotten married at all. If you have complaints, just divorce him now, stop whining." Layla said this as if it were a bother, then went off to fix her makeup and head out. Left behind was her husband, taking care of the kids by himself, looking out of place and uncomfortable at his wife's family home. Realizing once again that I couldn't get along with Layla, I continued to be troubled by Jackson's coldness. Yet, I couldn't bring myself to leave, and time just passed by. Nearly 30 years later. The worries of my youth have faded into the busyness of life, and I've ended up not divorcing Jackson. The romantic feelings are long gone, but I still consider us part of the same team, in a way. When Ava became a middle schooler, I started a part-time job as a cashier, finding a place for myself outside the home. However, the store where I had been working part-time for many years was going to close. The store where I work is closing, so I'm gonna be out of a job next month. I reported at dinner, and Jackson looked up. He seemed a bit surprised. Ava, who had been munching on her hamburger, swallowed and said, "That's okay. Mom, you've been working hard for so long, why don't you take it easy for a while? If you quit your job, we can sync our weekends. Let's go on a family trip or something." I was pleased with Ava's suggestion. Until now, it had been difficult to find a weekend that worked for both busy me and Jackson, who had weekends off. But, as Ava said, it would be easier to coordinate now. Ava works in the service industry, so even as a full-time employee, she has some flexibility in choosing her days off. After dinner, while I was washing the dishes, Jackson suddenly started talking to me. It was rare for us to have a conversation, except maybe while watching TV. "Does not working mean you'll be home all the time? Let me know if you have plans to go out," he said, seemingly concerned about dinner arrangements. "I don't have any specific plans, but I'll be home by the evening if I do." Jackson nodded ambiguously, still appearing to want to ask. It was unusual for him to be this inquisitive without being the controlling type, I thought, promising to let him know if I was going out. Becoming a homemaker again after so long felt strange. Continuing the housework as before left me with too much free time during the day. I tried to enjoy myself by reading more and getting into cooking, but I still found myself with too much leisure time. Above all, I missed talking to people. Moreover, Jackson had started coming home later recently. When I asked him why, he said his workload at the company had increased. So, I decided to visit my father, who lives about a 10-minute drive away. My mother had passed away a few years ago, and since then, my father has been living peacefully with his 2 cats. He was delighted when I visited him with homemade sweets. "By the way, Abigail, have you seen Layla recently?" he asked during our pleasant chat. Since we usually only meet during major holidays, I shook my head. Then, my father said, looking a bit troubled, "Layla is working at a school just 2 stations away now, right? So, it's close. That's why I wanted to share some of the tomatoes plums we buy here. I called her over after work. Then she showed up in quite flashy clothes. I wonder if that's the trend now?" Even if you mention that kind, I can't answer without having seen it myself. By the way, I don't like tomato, but my sister loves them. Something was odd. Layla's phone rang on the table, and when I went to hand it to her, she got really mad and said, "Don't touch it." Plus, she seemed to want to place her phone face down, and when I warned her that it could scratch the screen, she glared at me. That was all there was to it, but I felt somewhat uneasy. That's because my sister wasn't the type to fuss over how she placed her phone in the past. Wondering what was going on, I went home. At dinner that day, I casually mentioned this to my family. "I went to my parents' house today, and my sister seemed off. She's become flashy, and she insists on placing her phone screen down. What's going on with her?" To me, it wasn't just a feeling of discomfort, there was also worry in my words. Then, Ava spoke up. "Aunt Layla isn't cheating, is she?" I almost dropped my chopsticks in shock. Jackson was choking on his soup, coughing. "I read somewhere that those are signs of someone cheating. Other signs include going out more, coming home late, and checking their partner's schedule a lot. Hearing this, I instinctively looked at Jackson. Some of the traits Ava mentioned fit him exactly. I thought it was probably overthinking, but it still bothered me. Don't talk about that kind of stuff outside. It's embarrassing. Jackson, noticing my gaze, made a sour face. The next day, I unexpectedly ran into my sister. We bumped into each other at the convenience store near our house. Huh, sis? It's rare to see you around here. Going to Dad's house? Maybe because I called out so suddenly, my sister jumped in surprise. When she turned around, she was wearing bright lipstick and a large scarf. Her outfit was flashy, and I could see why Dad was concerned. I had a brief chat with my sister, and then, remembering the conversation from last night, I thought it might be okay to consult her about Jackson. You know, Ava mentioned the traits of someone cheating yesterday. And well, my husband fits quite a few of them. It's probably nothing, right? I'm just feeling a bit uneasy. As I sighed, my sister was busy choosing a drink. Ignoring my sigh, my sister was choosing a drink with a casual tone. You're overthinking it with the cheating stuff. If he is cheating, maybe there's something wrong on your end? Like, not being charming enough? Her attitude, as if what she was saying wasn't of any importance, irritated me a bit. She quickly headed to the checkout, as if to end the conversation. Left behind, I bit my lip, unable to say anything. Then, a few weeks later, on a Sunday, when I had almost forgotten about the conversation about cheating, I went out to see a movie. I was looking forward to seeing this film in a good environment, so I traveled a bit further to a new cinema. Just as I was about to arrive, my phone suddenly rang. Mom, sorry, can you come pick me up? I feel sick, Ava said in a pained voice over the phone. I was startled. What's wrong? Are you okay? I'll come right now, just wait for me. I hurriedly changed my route and drove off. When I arrived at Ava's workplace, Ava was already waiting outside the building. It seemed like Ava was feeling sick because of her period. It was so bad, she even felt nauseous. Let's just go home. I'll visit the gynecologist later, Ava said, so I decided to head home for now. A few minutes later, as I arrived in front of our house, driving safely, I was puzzled. Jackson's company car was parked in front of the house. Since Jackson is in sales, he might have stopped by the house for some reason during his rounds. Maybe he forgot something. He knew I wouldn't be home today, so there might have been a chance he couldn't ask me to receive a delivery. Without thinking much, I parked my car and opened the front door with my daughter. There were women's shoes. In the entrance, there were women's shoes that weren't ours. Jackson's shoes were there, too. I felt a chill throughout my body. The conversation about cheating suddenly came back to me. Then, I noticed strange noises coming from the bedroom. It seemed they hadn't noticed us. Not just because of her condition, but leaving Ava, who was pale, at the entrance, I approached the bedroom. And then, I stopped. Because I recognized the voice all too well. Sis! I blurted out. Jackson was with my sister, right in the midst of it. I quietly went back to the entrance, trying not to make any noise. Leaving Ava, who was feeling under the weather, at the entrance, I sped off in my car. My destination was my parents' house. When I arrived at my parents' house, my dad was just doing some gardening in the yard. Dad, it's about my sister, it's serious. I pulled my dad into the car. He was somewhat covered in mud, but that was the least of my concerns. I explained the situation as we headed to our house. After hearing the story, my dad nodded with his smartphone set to record. All right, leave it to me, he said, holding his latest model smartphone that he had queued up to buy, using the abundant free time of his retirement. I could guess what he was planning to do, but I was past the point of stopping him. Do you want to go about this seriously, or do you want to make a mockery of it? Without hesitation, I responded. Please make it somewhat humorous at first. I'm definitely getting a divorce, so I want to show this to a lawyer. There might be two dirty bodies getting caught on camera, so we need to neutralize the grossness somehow. My dad nodded firmly. Soon after, we arrived at our home. Ava was sitting on the ground outside the entrance, hugging her knees and looking down. As we approached, she looked up and said, "They're still at it. So energetic for their age. And sorry, I felt so sick I threw up." Ava looked really rough. I had left work early to take a break, but getting caught up in something like this was the last thing I needed. Feeling incredibly sorry for Ava, I patted her back and spoke to her. "I'm sorry, Ava. You can go to your room if you want. Can you walk?" When I asked, Ava slowly stood up. As I quietly opened the door, trying not to make any noise, I noticed where Ava had thrown up and couldn't help but laugh. Now, it was time to barge in. My dad and I exchanged looks and headed toward the bedroom. From inside, we could still hear sounds of activity, somewhat quieter than before. "Here we go, on 3. Dad whispered to me, and then flung the door open. The two on the bed screamed in surprise. Really, we were the ones who wanted to scream. What on earth were they doing on the bed I sleep in every night? The two were caught in the act, literally in their birthday suits, being intimate. At least they had the decency to lay down a bath towel, probably to avoid soiling the sheets. If they were going to be that considerate, I wished they wouldn't have done it at our house in the first place." "Whoa, father-in-law!" Jackson was the first to snap back to reality. My sister, with her smeared lipstick, looked utterly confused, desperately trying to cover herself. My dad stormed into the scene, starting his act of being furiously angry. "Layla! What on earth are you doing at your age? Have some shame!" And Jackson, betraying Abigail for Layla, "I will not forgive this." Despite his rage, the way he was holding the camera steady showed he wasn't lost in anger. My dad has always been like that. The more furious or shocked he is, the calmer he becomes, managing to navigate the situation to the other's disadvantage. But Jackson and my sister were too flustered to make such a judgment. Normally seen as the fun-loving grandpa, my dad had them completely shaking in fear with his eyes narrowed in anger. Handing me the smartphone, he pressed on toward the two even further. Since when have you been doing this? Disgraceful, both of you, ugh, ugh." He turned beet red, ranting incoherently, then suddenly collapsed onto the bed. For a moment, I panicked, thinking he really fell ill, but he deliberately fell in a clean area, so it seemed like an act. I immediately played along with my dad's acting. "Dad! Oh no, maybe the blood rushed to his head and burst a blood vessel. Isn't he breathing?" While pretending to panic, I kept the smartphone's camera firmly aimed at my sister and Jackson. My sister was so fixated on my dad that she didn't notice I was recording. Turning pale, the first thing she said was, "The will, we have to talk about the will." Jackson was also pale, but even he seemed surprised by my sister's reaction. Covering his lower half with a pillow that had fallen, Jackson muttered in a daze, "Is that really what we should be worried about right now?" I couldn't agree more. Then my dad suddenly sat up, sighing deeply at my frozen sister. "Layla, you're really bringing me down. That's just low. How did you end up like this?" My sympathy was inevitable for my dad, who was genuinely appalled, not acting this time. As my dad got up, my sister's expression dropped as if realizing she had messed up. I kept filming the disgraceful scene of Jackson and my sister, egging them on. "That's terrible, sis. To think the first thing you say when your own father collapses is that. It figures, someone who'd do such a thing with her sister's husband would say something different, huh?" My sister turned an angry face toward me, noticing for the first time that she was being recorded. I kept the camera on her as she screamed, trading places with my dad to keep filming. This was to catch Jackson, who was starting to dress in the corner of the room. "Hey, don't you run away. Ava's feeling sick and just came back home. It would be terrible to disturb her more when she's already feeling so bad she's throwing up." Hearing his daughter's name, Jackson let out a small scream, shocked by the revelation that Ava knew about this situation. He seemed shocked by the revelation that Ava knew about this situation. If he had any conscience about it being wrong, he shouldn't have done it in the first place. It's infuriating. The two were naked in bed, clearly in the midst of an affair. "Oh, look here, an empty bottle of some fancy energy drink. Seems like you two were really going at it," I said, playing the part of a reporter for my dad's camera. My sister, now screaming, fled the bedroom wearing only a coat. My daughter running outside with just a coat on. "This is tough," my dad's voice followed her. When my sister went to the entrance, she screamed again. "No! What is this?" Knowing what to expect, I caught up to my sister without any surprise. It turned out, Ava had thrown up at the entrance, right onto my sister and Jackson's shoes. The women's shoes were very neat, somewhat fancy even. With plenty of Ava's vomit inside them, it's understandable why one would scream. "Sis, where do you think you're going? You're not getting away." My dad and I caught up to my sister, who had frozen in place. Then, we made Jackson sit in Siza along with her to confess what they had done. "I'm sorry. I apologize, it's my fault." "Since when?" Probably 2 years ago." Jackson spoke hesitantly, glancing at my sister. When I wondered what was next, my sister clicked her tongue and curtly corrected. 3 years. It seems the affair started 3 years ago. The year my sister took her current teaching position. Frustrated with Jackson's poor memory and dismayed by my sister's diligent correction, my dad commanded, "Both of you, apologize to Abigail and me." Urged by my father, they repeated their apologies toward us. My sister, in just a coat, and Jackson, naked, made me feel utterly sick. I felt like I might throw up myself. Of course, the recording didn't stop. I wonder if releasing this video to the public would get us in trouble? But it should serve as evidence. My dad mused, and I nodded vigorously in agreement. Then my sister began to tremble as she voiced a bizarre theory. "You can't sue family. Surely, crimes within the family don't count." Honestly, I was baffled. How could she say that such serious misconduct within the family wouldn't be considered a crime? On further inquiry, it seemed she had misunderstood the fact that certain crimes like theft may not be prosecutable among family members. Still, one would think it obvious this case doesn't fit that exemption. Hours later, Ava and I sought refuge at my father's house. We couldn't bear to stay in a house where such things had happened. We urgently needed to find a lawyer. Since my sister was also married, we had to inform her husband and children. Looks like we're in for a busy time, I thought, rolling up my sleeves. Naturally, being betrayed by Jackson and my sister was a shock. The lack of appetite even at midnight was due to a complete loss of hunger. Closing my eyes only brought back the disgusting voices of my sister and Jackson, keeping me from sleep. Yet, I felt undefeated. Not sorrow or despair, but anger filled my heart. A few days later, I visited a lawyer's office. The lawyer, without cracking a smile, took serious notes until my sister brought up her "family can't sue family" theory, at which point he couldn't help but burst into laughter. I found myself pointlessly impressed by what tickled a lawyer's fancy. According to the lawyer, I can claim damages from both Jackson and my sister. Of course, a divorce is also possible. Considering the division of marital assets and the possibility of also taking damages from my brother-in-law, Jackson might end up nearly penniless. Furthermore, I discussed with the lawyer my desire to inform my sister's family and Jackson's parents, my in-laws, about everything. The lawyer advised that it would be best to do so once the divorce is finalized. With that in mind, I went and got a divorce petition. It's for presenting to Jackson once the discussion on the division of assets is completed. Just a week later, my divorce from Jackson was finalized. Presumably realizing there was no escape after being caught on camera like that, Jackson agreed to the divorce willingly. I was the one who filed the petition, and Jackson went to work as usual today. He's probably acting like nothing happened at work right now. Right after filing for divorce, I visited my in-laws in the neighboring county to greet them and show them the infamous video. My in-laws, who have decent values, were furious with their son Jackson and were understanding of my decision to claim damages. I told my in-laws, "I truly appreciate all you've done for me until now. Ava will continue to live with me from now on. She's your granddaughter as well, so if it's all right with you, I hope you can continue to have a good relationship with her. However, she has said she never wants to see her father again and doesn't consider him a parent anymore. Please be mindful of that." My in-laws hung their heads in disappointment but agreed. A few hours later, after finishing our conversation, I left Jackson's family home and went to the place I had arranged to visit beforehand. It was my sister's house. Waiting there were my brother-in-law, who had taken the day off for this, and my sister's son, who is already married and living independently. I handed them copies of the video and a business card of the lawyer. "I intend to claim damages from my sister as well. Of course, you, my brother-in-law, can also claim damages from both my sister and Jackson." My brother-in-law nodded solemnly at my words. Then, the screening began here as well. My sister's son left his seat midway through and didn't return. My brother-in-law's complexion turned ashen as he watched the screen until the end, tears welling up in his eyes. While I was at my sister's house, she came home. It was already 6 p.m. by the clock, and it had gotten completely dark outside. My sister was shockingly surprised to see me, almost collapsing. She started trembling when she noticed her son from another state and her husband, who would usually still be at work, were there. "Welcome home, sis. I'll be leaving soon. Please discuss the rest with your family. Oh, and you'll be receiving a claim for damages from my lawyer soon, so make sure you pay it. If it's not paid, your workplace might get notified, so be careful," I said before leaving my sister's house. Getting into my car and starting the engine, my sister ran out, shouting something. But I had no intention of listening to her words anymore. I honked briefly and decided to head home. About half a year later, my sister and her husband finally divorced, and she paid a substantial amount in damages. It seems she was quite reluctant to divorce, causing a lot of trouble, which led to a divorce lawsuit. My brother-in-law hired a very competent lawyer, and I heard my sister was thoroughly defeated in court. After the divorce, my sister was kicked out of her house and disowned by the son she had once painfully given birth to. Now, she leads a lonely life, indulging in binge eating and drinking, and can no longer fit into her favorite brand name clothes. Although she was able to pay the damages because she was working, her life has become difficult. She once came to see my father, but upon realizing that Ava and I were living with him, she fled quickly. She called, probably to discuss her debts, my father said with a hint of sadness. Despite everything, to my father, she is still his daughter. As for Jackson and Ava, there's also a story to tell. Happening around the same time as my sister's divorce. As we were chilling and watching TV at night, Ava got a message on her smartphone. She frowned at first glance and immediately set it to block calls. Turns out, it was apparently a message from Jackson asking for a meeting. Jackson, who's never done household chores, now lives in a place that's become dirty with dust and mold. He's been eating out more, getting sick, and his money is running low, he whined in the message. He said he was shocked to see a photo of me and my mom walking arm in arm, looking happy. He wrote that he wanted to walk with me too. Ugh, no way. That's really creepy. I wish I could erase his existence from my memory. Ava shuddered in disgust. Even though my dad seemed to miss his daughter, Ava wants to be forever strangers with that father. Now, here comes the part about divine retribution given by chance. This wasn't my fault, but it ended up being another punishment for my sister and Jackson. The story goes back to when my sister and her husband were wrestling with the decision to divorce or not. At that time, it wasn't just the two of them. It seems my sister's son's family was also pulled into numerous family meetings. Amid such adult turmoil, Lucas, my sister's 4-year-old grandson, was watching closely. At 4, he's practically still a baby. Naturally, he couldn't fully grasp the gravity of the situation. As a result, Lucas accidentally blurted out to his preschool teacher and friends, saying something like this. "My grandma and her sister's husband were naked in bed together. Grandpa, Dad, and great-grandpa were super mad at her. Why is it bad to sleep naked? Is it because you might catch a cold?" Hearing this, other kids found it amusing and talked about it with their families. The parents were shocked by such an unbelievable story and likely gossiped among themselves. You can imagine the teachers probably did some gossiping too. The rumor spread unchecked. And just when my sister and her husband finalized their divorce, the rumor had reached Jackson's workplace and even his clients. It was a convoluted connection, something about the client's son being a friend of my sister's grandson's brother. It's too tangled to follow. Anyway, it seems the connections between people can stretch unexpectedly far. Essentially, Jackson was exposed for his affair at his company and with clients. Jackson quickly lost his standing. Having divorced over an affair, especially with his wife's sister, naturally led to scorn. Just a month after the rumors started spreading, Jackson, who was expected to have a promising career until retirement, chose early retirement due to the unbearable situation. Ava heard about this ending from our grandparents and laughed, saying, "That's karma, right there." The situation was even more serious for my sister. She's a school teacher, of all professions. Being in such a position, she became the target of rumors in no time. The gossip spread from child to adult, quickly reaching other schools. Complaints from parents arrived, and my sister realized for the first time that what she had done was known all around. Perhaps the discomfort was too much, so my sister requested a transfer to a school in a more remote location, hoping for a fresh start. She had hoped that this place, being much more rural than where she currently lived, would allow her to live quietly. But it was too late. The rumor of her misdeed had reached her new posting beyond just the neighborhood. Moreover, the countryside tends to be much stricter about scandals than the city. In the end, my sister took a leave of absence from her job, which she used to be so proud of. Rumors of her affair with her sister's husband caused all her friends to distance themselves from her. Now, she feels scared that she's being gossiped about by strangers wherever she goes and has become somewhat of a recluse. It's likely she'll end up resigning. This is what I heard from my dad, who had been listening to my sister's complaints. The network of gossip is terrifying. There seems to be no safe haven left for them. Hearing this made me a bit scared that rumors might be spreading about me too. However, from what I've heard, it seems I've gotten off lightly, perhaps because I'm just seen as a victim. People have said things like, "The sister seems like a serious person." I'm relieved that my serious-looking exterior has saved me. 5 years have passed since that incident. Ava and I have been living with our dad, continuing a happy life, cherishing each other. Ava and I, both still single, cherish each other and live a happy life. Dad is still in good health, and the home feels so much more comfortable without our judgmental sister around. Ava seems to have little interest in getting married. Even now in her 30s, she continues to work hard, living the life of a successful singleton. I once thought our parents' disastrous marriage might have influenced her, but that doesn't seem to be the case. After all, in today's world, there aren't many benefits for a woman to get married. There are disadvantages to working, sure. Just changing your last name is a big deal. Well, I wouldn't mind having kids, but I don't think I need a husband," Ava said, shrugging. She was recently promoted, gaining a title along with it. I'm proud of her, really. Interestingly, there seems to be a cute younger male colleague at work who admires Ava, but it's unclear what will come of it. Our in-laws continue to have a good relationship with Ava, but there's no contact with me. They've kept their distance since Jackson started living with them, not wanting to cause any trouble. After resigning, it didn't take long for Jackson to truly lose his way. He nearly ended up homeless before being reluctantly taken in by my in-laws out of pity. In return, he's closely monitored, and they manage all his finances. Jackson, stripped of all freedom, seems to be worn out from tough day labor jobs every day. I've heard through the grapevine he's struggling to make ends meet, barely affording his medication for a chronic condition. On the other hand, I've recently started working again. I found a part-time job at a library, surrounded by books I love. It's so fulfilling to see students and families come to borrow books and leave with smiles on their faces. Ava, Dad, and I are also planning a trip together. Just deciding where to go is already a source of excitement. I'm currently living my best life,